Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute power of asking what if. We're going to explore the psychological mechanics behind our wildest, most out there hypothetical questions. I mean, have you ever caught yourself just staring off into space, totally lost in thought, wondering about something completely absurd? Well, you are definitely not alone. We're going to look closely at exactly why our brains do this, and why it's actually absolutely crucial for innovation.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the absurd what-ifs. We're going to examine our total fascination with ridiculously dangerous scenarios.
So think about it for just a second. What would actually happen to you if you were sent straight into a black hole? Or consider this completely jarring visual. What if you somehow lived inside an active volcano? Or what if you were caught right next to a nuclear explosion? These are really intense, visceral, extreme scenarios, right? And they immediately trigger this deep psychological urge to just fill in the missing information. We literally can't help but ask the question.
Now, the blunt, completely factual answer to all of these highly unlikely scenarios, well, you'd probably die. And honestly, scientists could predict a highly detailed account of your exact demise, right down to the cellular level. So, if we know the outcome is basically certain doom, why do we even care? Why does the human brain totally obsess over these hypotheticals instead of just, moving on?
That brings us to Section 2, the psychology of curiosity. Let's transition into the neuroscience and psychology behind why our brains are hardwired to absolutely love these unanswerable scenarios.
What we're looking at here is essentially a biological reward circuit. It goes like this. When you're confronted with incomplete information, that's step 1, your brain automatically recognizes an information gap, which is step 2. Psychologists suggest we have this deeply natural, innate tendency to want to fill that gap. And when we try to do so, it taps right into a reward circuit in our brain, triggering the release of dopamine for step 3. That dopamine rush, it makes you feel fantastic. It literally feels good to be curious.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how psychologists actually map out and classify this curiosity on a grid. They do this because there isn't just one single definition that covers the whole shebang. So on the x-axis, curiosity ranges from specific, like needing the answer to a piece of trivia or a puzzle, all the way over to diversive, which is a ceaseless exploration just to seek novel information and ward off boredom. Then on the y-axis, we have perceptual curiosity, which is aroused by new stimuli, versus epistemic curiosity. That one is a deep yearning for new knowledge. Usually we're trying to understand something better, like the inner workings of the human heart or the universe itself. But where do the ridiculous, seemingly non-serious questions fit into this puzzle?
Let's explore that in Section 3, Feynman's tiny thought experiment. We're going to shift the narrative from abstract psychology to a brilliant historical anecdote, moving from childlike wonder to absolute genius-level application.
Check out this quote. Now, this isn't just a kid asking a silly question or having a random passing thought. This is the renowned physicist Richard Feynman at a Caltech talk back in 1959. He famously asked, "Why cannot we write the entire 24 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pin?" I mean, it sounds like a completely absurd proposition, right? A totally unrealistic what-if.
But naturally, being a genius scientist known for his incredible work in quantum physics, he didn't just ask the question and leave it there. He actually analyzed the problem. Let's break down the math he did. The head of a standard pin is about 1/16 of an inch across. Feynman realized that if you magnify that by 25,000 times, the area would be big enough to contain all the pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica. So logically, to make the entire encyclopedia fit, all you'd have to do is reduce the size of the writing 25,000 times.
Let's zoom in even further. Really get down to the microscopic level. If you shrink the writing down that much, the diameter of a tiny dot on the letter I would be in the range of 100 millionth of a centimeter. To put that into perspective, the area of that dot would contain just 1,000 atoms. Yet remarkably, it would still be big enough to see under an electron microscope. No way, right?
Now let's zoom out to the massive real-world application Feynman was imagining here. He essentially dedicated his precious time to a question that had absolutely zero obvious practical use at the moment. He wondered what the Caltech librarian would say if he told her that in 10 years, all the information she struggled to keep track of, I'm talking 120,000 physical volumes stacked from floor to ceiling, endless drawers full of cards, massive storage rooms packed full of books, could be kept on just one single library card.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Feynman literally moved across our curiosity grid. He started with a perceptual and diversive form of curiosity, simply imagining the novel stimuli of tiny writing on a pinhead just to ward off boredom. But that sparked a transition into a more epistemic and specific curiosity, where he actively wanted to know how to solve the problem. He asked, what's actually stopping us from inventing a tiny printer that can do this? He realized a need. And even though he wasn't quite right about the final format, thanks to nanotechnology and modern computer tech, entire libraries can now fit on tiny hard drives. He essentially predicted the future.
Let's move to section 4 and see how this builds into our final point, the power of asking why. We're connecting these historical thought experiments directly to the real world.
So, the crucial point we need to take away here is that what-ifs are absolutely not just childish habits. Actually, scratch that. They are much more than that. They are vital thought experiments that help us better examine the present, organize our thinking around the great unknowns, and literally push the frontiers of science. This is the real bright side of our most bizarre, far-out hypotheticals.
Remember our opening question about falling into a black hole? Well, when scientists ask that seemingly ridiculous question and actually follow the math down the rabbit hole, they find out something absolutely incredible. Inside a black hole, time and space actually switch roles. It leads to these mind-bending cosmic truths that we simply wouldn't uncover if we didn't indulge those weird questions first. And these what-ifs also lead to incredibly cool practical ideas right here on Earth. Take the inventor of the Polaroid camera, for example. He was inspired to create it simply because his impatient 3-year-old daughter asked the classic, innocent what-if question. She just said, "Daddy, why do we have to wait for the picture?" That single, incredibly simple question from a toddler sparked a literal revolution in photography.
But I want you to consider the number 4 for a second. This represents a really stark visual warning and a wildly important statistic. Asking simple, curious questions might seem easy, right? And we are indeed born with this skill. But research actually shows that for the average person, human curiosity statistically peaks at around age 4. And then it drastically declines as we grow up. Curiosity is kind of like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. You have to actively keep practicing it.
So you have to keep on asking questions. And definitely don't hesitate to find a rabbit hole and go all the way down it. You just never know what you might find at the other end. Remember Feynman's ridiculous pinhead idea we talked about? Well, it was actually realized. Scientists literally engraved the first page of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities onto the head of a pin using a beam of electrons. Going down these rabbit holes yields truly incredible, game-changing results.
Which brings us to our final and perhaps most important thought for this explainer. What rabbit hole will you go down next? I really want to challenge you to exercise that curiosity muscle today. Keep asking those completely absurd what-ifs, because they just might change the world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious out there, and I'll catch you next time.